1 year ago, I was diagnosed as type 1 diabetic. This means that my pancreas isn't producing nearly enough insulin, which means that unmanaged or unoptimized, my blood sugar goes out of control. It goes very high and can drop very low, both of which are dangerous. So the goal is to keep it in the safe zone as stable as possible. So I'm going to take you on the journey of how I found out that I had type 1 diabetes and why it had gone undetected for so long and why it only appeared, slightly later in life. So in November 2023, I set a goal for myself of building a certain amount of muscle. I was going to the gym and I was going through a bulk. I increased my calorie intake from about 2,500 calories a day to 4,500. And I did this consistently over 2 months. And now I had tried this previously in my life, but I'd always felt terrible and I'd never been able to put on substantial amounts of muscle, which I had essentially put down to just a very fast metabolism. And so maybe that was partly right, but realistically, we now know that, my blood sugar isn't working, and insulin is one of those key growth hormones as well. And there are lots of, as we'll go into, there are lots of negative things associated with type 1 diabetes that make it harder to build muscle. But I've overcome that. And so from December 2023 to January 2024, I was eating 4,500 calories every single day without fail. And actually there were some days where I went over that because I did not want to miss my calorie intake goal. I did actually put on weight during this period. Initially, I put on 1 kilogram. So I went from 71 to 72. And I definitely felt a little bit different and was getting stronger in the gym. But then in January, I was not only plateauing in the gym and my performance was going down, but I was feeling terrible throughout the entire day. My sleep was really bad. I really could not sleep well. I had really low energy, and just every day I was powering through my food because I wasn't really enjoying eating 4,500 calories. I was feeling terrible in general. I could not sleep. Also, my skin deteriorated as well, which was a little bit surprising. And then in that final week of January, I not only was not putting on weight, but I stopped dropping weight. So I dropped from about 72 kilograms to 70 kilograms in the space of about 4 or 5 days. At this point, I know something's going wrong, but again, my head was like, keep powering through, trust the process to some degree. And then it was a Saturday night. I was at a party. There's actually a spicy version of this story that I won't put on YouTube. But anyway, I was at a party and I felt terrible. I wasn't drinking, so the reason I felt bad definitely wasn't due to any kind of external substance. But I was so low energy. I was forcing myself through conversations and through interactions, which in itself was an interesting exercise to, try and not show what you might be feeling and keep powering through and keep showing positive energy where possible. So I was at this party and I was feeling terrible, very low energy, but I was powering through probably about 1 a.m. And then it got to a point where I hit a wall and I knew I had to sit down. I was like, okay, I need to sit down and get my shit together. I need to get myself together because I feel like I'm going to pass out or die in this moment. So I sat down in this chair for what could have been 5 minutes. It felt like an hour. I just sat in this chair, let my body reset, and then I gathered my stuff and I went. Then Monday morning, I tried to get a doctor's appointment through the NHS. That didn't work, no availability, etc. And so I was thinking, no, I really need to sort this. So coincidentally, I happened to have, in a cupboard somewhere in a medical box, one of those finger prick glucose tests. I did it and it was very high. It was over 23 nmol, which is incredibly high. The healthy range is between 4 and 10. And I knew this was bad, obviously. It's so funny. At this point, I still did not think I was diabetic in any way. I simply knew that there was something wrong with my body at that moment and I needed to sort it out. So I ended up paying £100 or £99 out of pocket to go see a private GP in Soho. I turned up. She was really nice, really friendly. She just said, okay, we're just going to run a few tests. We ran these tests, came back. Her then demeanor changed quite quickly. She said, look, it's very possible you've got type 1 diabetes. You need to go to A&E right now. Promise me that you're going to go straight to A&E. And, there was no part of me that wasn't going to follow her advice, but I definitely didn't think it was that serious again. Even when she said type 1 diabetes, she said, it's possible you're type 1 diabetic. And at this point, I'm still thinking, well, there's no way I'm type 1 diabetic because, that happens when you're young. You need to inject yourself with insulin. There's no way this is that bad. I've probably just eaten something or, who knows? So I go to A&E. I expect not to be seen for quite some time because it's A&E. I was seen within 10 minutes, maybe. Like I barely sat down, went in for triage. Pretty much as soon as I'd come back out from triage, they called me back through blood tests, etc., take me through, put me on an IV drip. So they're basically giving my body fluids. That felt much, much better. That kind of really took the edge off the headache. My body, still felt quite hot and bothered, but my headache had definitely decreased. And then so I'm on this IV drip. I didn't have a bed or anything like that. I was actually sat on a chair in a hallway, holding this IV drip, and they were coming back and forth. They took so much blood, or it felt like they took so much blood, but they did so many tests. After a few hours of sat in this hallway with this IV drip, eventually I get spoken to by a consultant who's a specialist in diabetes. Comes back and he says, look, we think you're type 1 diabetic. He says, for whatever reason, it's gone unnoticed for this amount of time. I pause there. I spoke about this with the consultant and he was asking all these lifestyle questions because he was thinking, wait, is this guy type 2 diabetic? He doesn't look like it. He looks fit and healthy. Even prior to this, I had a very active, healthy lifestyle. Even though I was eating a lot, I was still eating a lot of clean calories. This was not a dirty bulk or a junk food bulk. Like these were clean calories that I was having. And so he says, look, you're type 1 diabetic. For whatever reason, your pancreas is not producing enough insulin. At this point, they still wanted to run a bunch of tests. So I had to come back to the doctors a number of times in the following weeks. But they said, look, you're type 1 diabetic. What we're going to do is we're going to try giving you some insulin. So the nurse injects me with a little bit of insulin in my stomach, maybe a lot of insulin. I don't even know how much it was. And then probably within about 10-15 minutes, my whole body felt like I'd stepped from a hot room into an air-conditioned room. I felt so much better. And now they asked me a bunch of questions, had to stay for a few more hours because they wanted to see how I was reacting to the insulin. Because obviously if you give insulin to a normal person whose body is creating insulin, then their blood sugar dips uncontrollably fast and, it can kill them. And so they wanted to make sure that I would respond in the way that a type 1 diabetic would respond to external insulin and not the way that a normal person would. But because I was feeling pretty good after this insulin, feeling pretty good after the fluids, which I'll explain in a moment, they said I could go home. And that night, I honestly tell you, I almost feel like a little bit emotional, talking about it, because I slept so well that night. Really felt like I'd never slept so well in my entire life that night. And now going back to the conversation with that diabetic specialist consultant, the doctor, he basically explained that my body had gone into diabetic ketoacidosis, which left unintended over the course of days or weeks is fatal for two reasons. One, because your blood glucose is so high, your body is trying to flush out the excess blood sugar in your system. And so you get very thirsty and then you urinate a lot. And then you get very thirsty and then you urinate a lot. And then this cycle is depleting your body of electrolytes, and your body is not able to use the water in its system for all the kind of normal critical functions. And so what happened is, one of the reasons that I was getting a headache was because I was dehydrating myself, even though I was taking water. And this is why when they gave me fluids intravenously, I felt so much better, because I was getting fluids into my bloodstream with the electrolytes that were needed when, because of diabetic ketoacidosis, I hadn't been getting them. And now the second big thing about diabetic ketoacidosis is the keto part. What happens is, because your body cannot properly use the glucose in its bloodstream, it starts releasing ketones as a secondary energy source. But as this goes on, the number of ketones in your blood system starts becoming dangerously high, and this makes your blood quite acidic, which also isn't particularly good for your brain. But it also means that your body has to process this acidic blood and has to process all these ketones, which can also lead to liver failure or other organ failure. Now, although I felt really terrible, I don't think I was close to dying. I think that would have taken, I like to think that it would have taken longer for me to die. But obviously it was critical, and that's why I was seen so quickly in A&E.